If you're interested in how schools can serve as more than just hubs for education, but also as cornerstones of our community, you won't want to miss this episode of The Blue-Headed Stepchild. I spoke with Louis Malfaro, who's the Associate Executive Director of Austin Voices for Education and Youth. Check it out. All right, Louis, you've been in education a long time.
I have.
Yeah.
I have since the late 1980s.
I'm going to just read a little bit of your bio here,
Okay.
just to kind of give people a sense of all the different fields you've been in related to education. So Louis is a certified bilingual elementary school teacher and taught 2nd and 5th grades in Austin ISD. He's the past president and co-founder of Education Austin, the teacher and school employee organization in AISD. Louis served as the secretary, treasurer, and the president of the Texas American Federation of Teachers, and as a national vice president at the American Federation of Teachers. He is bilingual and completed a degree in elementary bilingual education from the University of Texas at Austin. Louis also studied public policy at the LBJ School of Public Affairs and has lived and studied in Mexico. He currently serves as the Associate Executive Director at Austin Voices for Education and Youth, where he's been for over 2 years. It's impressive. Do you dream about education policy and the future of education in Austin?
I think about it a lot. I do. I do. And I've been, as you said, on the inside and outside of it for many decades.
Yeah.
And I'm also the proud father of 2 graduates of public schools, one in Austin and one in Dripping Springs.
Excellent. So with vouchers is kind of one of the hot button issues that just passed the legislature and is going to go into effect next year. What effects do you think that's going to have on public education, specifically here in Austin? How is Austin prepared to handle vouchers going into effect next year?
So I think vouchers will affect Austin in a couple of ways. One, in the broader sense, the state has backed off of its commitment to fully fund public schools. So I see vouchers very much as the flip side of a coin of unwillingness to make investments in public education. So in that sense, Austin's public schools, like public schools all across the state, are going to suffer because the state legislature is redirecting resources away from public schools toward private schools. I think on a day-to-day basis, we're going to see in Austin what we've seen across the country where universal vouchers like these have been instituted. Most recently, Arizona is a good case study. What we find is that the money will go to subsidize affluent families who already have chosen to put their children into private schools. So the average Austin citizen, the average parents, the average school child is going to see less state investment in their school, and we're going to see a shift of funds from the working class, middle class, the 90% of us that send our kids to public schools, to the wealthy. You know, it's kind of like the big beautiful bill, what it did with taxes and shifting costs onto lower income families, making healthcare more expensive to give a tax break to the rich. That's what vouchers in Texas are going to do.
Right. I've read that 20% of the estimated $1 billion that will be set aside for it next year will go to families making over $160,000 a year. Right. And so people that would already be sending their kids to private school are now getting a subsidy on it, and 1/5 of the program's funds are going to be going to wealthy families.
Well, that's true, but if you read carefully, if lower income kids don't take advantage of the vouchers, then more of that money can go to higher end families. So it's not a cap. Initially, to get the law passed, they said, and $160,000 a year ain't median income. not even in a wealthy city like Austin. I mean, we're into top 10% there. But we're going to see more and more of those families, I believe, take advantage of the voucher, because many private schools, like here in Austin, St. Andrews, $10,000 doesn't get you in the door. And so I'm concerned that what's going to happen is the lower income families that this is supposed to help aren't going to be able to use it or take advantage of it, and more of that money will shift to more affluent families.
Right. But at the same time, the legislature has passed an $8.5 billion school funding package that's going to go from anything from teacher pay bumps to school security.
Right.
Do
Some
you
funding
think
for
that will be
special ed.
enough? Some of it to special ed. Do you think that will be enough to offset the divestment that will come from vouchers?
No, I don't. And here's why. In 2019, there was a fight over school funding and vouchers in the legislature, and vouchers did not pass, even after multiple special sessions. And as a result of that, Governor Abbott held public school funding broadly hostage. So 2019, no new money for public education. Then came this thing called COVID, which caused all sorts of disruption and unanticipated costs to school districts. Then came this thing called inflation that drove the cost of everything from labor to materials to building up. So between 2019 and 2023, 4 years, no funding for public education at all. So public schools got about 20% behind where they should have been. So this session, just to get caught up, most people, including Raise Your Hand Texas, Texas Association of School Boards, folks that spend a lot of time studying the school finance system, said that it was going to take somewhere between 20 and 25 billion just to get back to 2019. So $8.5 billion sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but not a lot of money when you're in a $20 billion hole.
Right.
And now with money being redirected to vouchers, and we believe that voucher cost is going to skyrocket over time. Because remember, it's not just for private schools. Parents can put it in an account and use it for, all sorts of additional laptops, camps, homeschooling, and buying materials. And again, looking at some of the other states that have allowed this very sort of liberal voucher type program, we've seen a lot of abuse, and we've seen, in the case of Arizona, it explode well beyond what the initial investment was.
Right. Yeah, I've seen some estimates saying that within by 2030, we could be looking at $5 billion a year investment in the program.
Right, which is $10 billion a biennium.
Right.
And now you're starting to talk about serious money.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so there's a teacher shortage in Texas, right? And now with the further imposition of religion in the classrooms with bills like the one mandating that the 10 Commandments are displayed, are you worried that it will further alienate teachers and exacerbate the problem?
The 10 Commandments thing, I mean, the Supreme Court's already kind of weighed in on this. So Texas likes to pass laws that the legislature likes to pass laws that they know are unconstitutional. I've spent a lot of time hanging out with faith leaders, including the Pastors for Texas Children, a very strong organization and network here in Texas of mostly Christian, Baptist, Church of Christ, some Methodist, Presbyterian pastors that strenuously oppose private school vouchers and oppose state funding for private religious instruction. And so I think that I don't think that we're going to be posting the 10 Commandments in schools in Texas, because the Supreme Court's going to say, it's not appropriate. I think what will drive and is driving people away from the teaching profession are the culture wars writ broadly, but also the fact that we have underfunded the system for so long. Teacher pay has been in Texas has lagged the national average, blah, 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 forever. When I was the president of Education Austin, I used to get up in front of the school board and I'd pull out my sister's salary schedule from, Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania, and say, this year my sister got a master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania in chemistry education. Wouldn't we love to have a teacher like that here? Well, they're going to pay her $12,000 a year more because they see she's a great teacher who has gone back to school and strengthened her credentials. We've tried to do it on the cheap here forever. 10% of all the kids in the country go to school in Texas schools.
Oh, wow.
10%. More that we don't have 10% of the population, but we have 10% of the school age population. So 1 out of every 10 kids goes to school in Texas. So when we drop the ball, whether it's on funding, whether it's passing laws, which we have been passing in this state for nearly 2 decades, allowing people to present themselves on the first day of school as the teacher of record, even though they've never been through a teacher preparation program at a university. They've spent the summer in a crash course at a regional service center, or even worse, at one of these for-profit operations, and they drop them into the classroom. And if they can swim for a year and the principal says, yeah, let them come back, then they anoint them a certified teacher. We've lowered the bar so much, and yet we still have a shortage. Now, why is that? I mean, it's because we're trying to do it on the cheap. We've deprofessionalized teaching. Also, and I don't know if we'll get to talking about testing or not, but Texas has remained mired in the past using an antiquated, broken, crooked accountability system that drives teachers nuts.
The STAR. No?
The STAR,
Okay.
but not just the STAR, the A to F rating system, the state's insistence that teachers be paid based on their students' test scores. Texas has really doubled down on a broken system that most of the rest of the country moved beyond.
So what is the alternative to testing, and, what are better ways to measure whether the schools are truly serving students well?
Right. So testing in and of itself isn't necessarily the problem. It's how tests get used. So the state house passed a bill this last session, House Bill 4, and it was a fairly comprehensive rewrite of the state's accountability system. And it moved away from a single summative end-of-year test to doing 3 short cycle tests, a beginning of year, a middle of year, and an end of year test. And the idea was that these tests would be used to provide baseline information to teachers to enable them to guide instruction. When a teacher thinks about assessment, they think about it in 2 ways. A summative assessment and a formative assessment. So a formative assessment is, okay, like, you're new to my class. I don't know you. I've kind of looked through your record, but I'm going to give you a basic test and see how you do and see what you know. And I'm also going to try to figure out, is there stuff you don't know that I'm going to need to teach you? And then at the end of the year, you give a final exam, a summative exam. You try to highlight all the different important things you covered. And it's a way of asking, did the student master the basic material? In Texas, we are using a test that is not valid and reliable to do things like force schools to close, force school districts to move teachers and administrators away from those schools, allow
reconsolidation, right?
Or reconstitution, allow school districts to be taken over by the education commissioner, who is not qualified to run schools and school districts.
Like what's happened in Houston, for example.
In Houston and in Fort Worth.
And I saw that the results of that is that Houston ISD, well, not direct result, but maybe in part, that Houston ISD lost like 800 teachers over the past year and a half or something like this, right?
There was a big exodus of teachers out of because Yeah, because TEA handed it off to Mike Miles, the old superintendent from Dallas, who now runs a chain of charter schools and, thinks that it's better to have a discipline unit than a library, apparently, in schools. And, the other thing is this, like when I started to teach, there were state standardized tests. And you gave the test, the scores got reported, the public could see them, the parents could see them. But that was it. Test transparency. Then No Child Left Behind came along, and all of a sudden, there were all these sanctions tied to assessment. And so the stakes got jacked up. And there's a whole body of research around what happens when you stop measuring broadly and you just measure narrowly, right? Like all these apocryphal stories, like in the Soviet Union, there was a factory and they got rewarded based on how many tons of nails they made. So they made really big, heavy nails. And then there was a shoe factory and they got assessed on how many pairs of shoes they could produce. So they produced all these really small shoes. And so if you're only looking at one outcome, then it starts to warp the system. Austin, way back in the day, in the late 90s, was the whole school district got indicted because there was an associate superintendent who hired some bean counter from TEA who knew a way to jigger the numbers such that if you had a school that was right on the line between passing and not passing, he knew a trick to push it over the edge. It had to do with unique ID numbers and social security numbers, and they got caught.
Right.
And I don't think anybody went to jail, but people definitely got fired. And this happened around the country when people's careers were based on one day, one assessment, and it doesn't work.
And so if the state has limited resources and they're trying to look at this from 10,000 feet up and try to figure out ways to judge how well schools are performing, where to put those resources, you're suggesting less emphasis on testing. What other metrics should they use to track success and progress and ROI?
Sure. There are other parts of the country that have moved on to looking at things like parent satisfaction, parent engagement, student attendance, student participation in a broader range of not just academic, but extracurricular activities. Austin Voices, the organization I work for now, focuses on community schools, which means that we try to help schools connect with not just service agencies, but with businesses, with higher education, with churches, with opportunities for students to do advanced study, to do internships. And so one way to look at the success of a school is how well is it engaging with the broader community? How much is it providing in the way of opportunity for students? Then there's some basic things too. Like I work in these 3 schools in Austin, Webb, Burnett, and Dobie middle schools that have all been threatened with closure because they've had multiple years of not meeting the state's accountability standard. And these schools are full of immigrant kids and refugee kids, like 60 to 70% English language learners. And there's almost nothing that we do to measure how are we doing on teaching these kids English.
Right.
In fact, the irony is after they're here a year, we're making them take on grade level tests in English when maybe they've only been here for 2 years. I mean, I went and studied in Mexico for a year, as you mentioned. Well, man, I got down there and I was a lost puppy, which was partly why I went. Because, after like 4 or 5 semesters of Spanish at UT and ACC, I was like, yeah, like I can conjugate some verbs, but I don't think I could get from the bus stop to the grocery store. And I really wanted to learn practical, useful Spanish to be able to speak it and understand it. But I spent a whole year there, and I am certainly not a native, fluent Spanish speaker. And I was an adult with many years of college under my belt. So
And now imagine trying to learn science or chemistry or whatever kids are studying, right, in that second language, and just compounding the obstacles.
It's very, very challenging. So there are lots of ways that we could create more robust rubrics for how we look at a school being successful. Now they use a regression model on, you tell teachers, well, we can't really explain to you why your school got a D, because it's too complicated. There are all these formulas, and we compared your students with students in other. So not only is it not helpful to the teacher, it's like a black box. And then at the end of it all the work that's gone in, all the orchestra performances and the ballet folklorico and the dinners, spaghetti dinners with the parents, and at the end of all that, the state spits out a single letter for the whole school. So as a parent, what does that even mean? My kid got a C. My kid's school got a C. I don't want to, how's my kid doing?
Right.
How's my kid doing in math?
Right.
Does he know fractions and decimals? What is he a good reader? Is he on grade level in reading? It doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah. And so I don't know if you've played around with this tool at all, but I'm sure you're familiar with on greatschools.org, for example. You'll see that they put a rating on the school, right? But you can click on it and you can get a breakdown of what comprises that, right?
Right.
And so they may be, average on test scores, but rank highly on the improvement that they've made on their test scores in recent years, or rank highly in ratios of teachers to students or after-school programming, lots of different metrics that they have on diversity,
Right.
And things like that a school can still rank really well, and there's transparency on how they derive these statistics, and it's not just test scores, right? It's more comprehensive.
Yeah. And those are interesting systems. I will say something else. You mentioned diversity. Austin always pops up at the top of these lists of cities that are the most segregated economically. And you really, really see that in this city.
Right.
Partly because years ago, the city chose not to be chopped up into little mini school districts, with the exception of Eanes, which carved it, Westlake carved itself out, its own school district. If you look at a map of Austin and draw a circle, there's this big bubble that cuts in, and that's Westlake. And, part of it's because of the river, too.
I'm about to say part of it also goes to Round Rock ISD, right? There's Round Rock ISD that overlaps into the city of Austin and Northwest Austin. And
there is, and Pflugerville also is in Travis County, but it really is a tale of two cities. And when I started teaching back in the dark ages, I started teaching the year they did away with crosstown busing. Austin was the last major urban school district in the country to be ordered to bus to desegregate by the U.S. Supreme Court. 1980. The court was almost getting out of the business of doing that. And so when I student taught at Metz Elementary School in East Austin, kids came on the bus every day from Northwest Austin, and the older kids from the neighborhood were bused across town. And they did that for 6 years. And then it was very unpopular. And in 6 years, Ronald Reagan got elected president, a lot changed in the country, and we went back to neighborhood schools for elementary school. And they tried to make some dispensation for this. They like when I started to teach at Blackshear Elementary School, they gave us lower class sizes. They gave us extra resources, a full-time counselor, full-time parent engagement specialist. But it's really hard to take a school that's 95% low-income kids and make it compete with a school where you only have 5 or 10% or even 20% kids that are poor. It's not that poor kids are not as smart as rich kids or not as capable. It's just that the disadvantages start to accrue at a very early age. And school districts have an obligation to try to overcome those disadvantages. And Austin has really struggled to do more for schools that serve higher needs kids.
And let me ask you about that. And so I know something that Austin Voices, one of their programs, is related to family resource centers.
Correct.
Right. And so what trends are you seeing in non-academic needs like housing stability, food access, mental health, and how are schools responding?
Right. So you mentioned the Family Resource Center. So Austin Voices, we run Family Resource Centers at 8 different schools that serve not only those schools, but surrounding schools. So I think we serve about 18 or 20 of the district's 120 or so schools. By the way, it's a very strong model that we have as a long-term goal to expand into all Title I schools. And in fact, we had a citizens committee that worked for several years and drew up a campaign for the future, we called it, that is still our operational long-term plan to bring these kinds of services to all the parts of Austin that serve kids in what are called Title I schools, or schools that have a certain percentage of low-income kids.
So what are the family resource centers?
So Family Resource Center is sited on the school campus. We have a Family Resource Center director. We have a social worker. We oftentimes have adjacent partner organizations like Adobe Middle School. We had SAFE there. SAFE is a nonprofit that runs the battered women's shelter, but they do a lot of other stuff, including a lot of prenatal and early childhood stuff. So we had them cited with us. We work very closely with the school. We are a service provider, but what we really try to do is to engage parents and get them connected to the school and connected to resources. And so we do a family needs survey at the beginning of the year. It goes home with every kid. It comes back. We aggregate those. We ask parents, what do you need in the way of help with adult education, English language learning, healthcare, housing, clothing, access to legal representation, the whole panoply of
food security.
On Monday, yesterday, we did a food pantry for 400 people at Adobe Middle School, drive-through, and then another 50 in the afternoon. So the Family Resource Center, the proposition is students who have obstacles in front of them struggle to learn. We want to remove those obstacles out of the way. And because students live in families, if mom is not healthy, if dad is unemployed, if there are no lights on because the light bill didn't get paid, if parents are hopping from apartment to apartment to try to find rent and the kids being pulled in and out of school. These are all things that are happening to families as we speak. We try to connect with those families and to stabilize them so the kid can come to school every day and get a good education.
And do you think these have been successful? Are they well received by the school? I know you obviously talk about the ideas to expand them. Yeah. And so are early signs showing that, this is the way to go?
Yeah. So the Family Resource Center model has been very successful. We've run Family Resource Centers for over 15 years. We have a partnership with the school district, the county, and the city, who all helped to fund a portion of the Family Resource Center. We in more recent years, especially since COVID, have really leaned in on adult education, adult leadership, and even having parents come to work part-time with us as community health workers, as technology navigators. So we've gotten funding from Austin Public Health, from some foundations, some federal funding to do job training. And we've got 30, mostly women, a couple men who have become certified community health workers. And I think we're now the biggest organization besides the county itself enrolling people in the medical access program, MAP, which is Travis County's healthcare program for people who don't have any other form of health insurance.
So the school is becoming more than just a place to educate children, right? It's becoming a cornerstone of the community for employment, for adult education, for health. It's becoming where people meet and gather and society grows, right?
Exactly. It has really become a hub. And, one of the most visible outcomes is this huge cadre of engaged parents, people who have been down at school board meetings, speaking to the board, people who have the superintendent's cell phone plugged into theirs. And, these are not affluent, college-educated West Austin parents who already show up with a lot of, knowledge about how to deal with power. These are people who have learned through the process how to engage with people in power to make demands on them for the benefit of their children.
It becomes community organizing, right?
It absolutely is community organizing.
Yeah, no, I love the model for sure. Okay, great. I got a fun one for you.
Okay.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about education in Austin tomorrow, what would it be and why? And you can't ask for unlimited wishes, and you can't ask for unlimited money.
So, we started talking about how Austin is, part of a state educational ecosystem. And I would have to say, if I could wave a magic wand, I would wave a magic wand and wish for a governor who cared about children. We do not have a governor who cares about children. He has presided over a debacle in the system that's supposed to protect the most vulnerable children, those that are in foster care and who do not have parents that are able to take care of them. He has pushed through this private school voucher scheme, did not visit a single public school during the entire course of the legislative session, but showed up at these, private Christian schools. I've got nothing against private Christian schools, even though if you go to their websites, many times they will tell you, we really want students that share our community's values. That's great. I don't want to pay for that. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, Greg Abbott he postulated about what other laws the Supreme Court might go back and reconsider. And one of the ones that he brought up himself was Plyler v. Doe, a Texas case from the early 1970s that established the right of all children in the United States to attend public schools, regardless of their status as immigrants, regardless of the status of their parents. This is a man who does not care about children, which is why there are groups like Mothers Against Greg Abbott that have formed. So I have to say, if I could change one thing, it would be to get rid of that guy because he's bad news for children.
Okay. And then on the other side of things, is there a particular, community advocate, lawmaker, or somebody that you think would make a great governor that is known for being a champion of public education in Texas?
Gina Hinojosa comes to mind.
Absolutely.
Gina and I kind of cut our teeth together as leaders in then Austin, now Central Texas Interfaith years ago.
Is she a former teacher?
Gina is not.
She was involved in Austin ISD?
She's a lawyer by trade. She has 2 kids that have attended the Austin public schools. One is still in school. She became a member of the Austin School Board and then became the president of the Austin School Board. Yeah. And as president of the Austin School Board, she was very hands-on. She helped the school district build bridges with other governmental agencies, including back when recapture, which is the state system of redistributing school tax dollars, was, sucking so much money out of Austin. And she went to the city and worked out a deal where the city picked up some of the costs for parent support specialists and some of the other things that were appropriate for the city to pay for. Gina has been a champion of public education, a member of the Texas House Public Education Committee, just a real fighter and hero. And she was, she and a small handful of other state representatives and state senators were really the public face of opposing Governor Abbott's voucher bill. She and James Tallarico, who both serve on the House Pub Ed Committee, spent a lot of time communicating to the public about why funding private education is not in the interests of Texas school children.
Yeah. No, and I think what it ultimately comes down to is money in politics, right? When it comes to Governor Abbott's aims, in which there was you've seen a lot of the headlines. It's a bill for the billionaires, and it's a lot of people that went into backing him. This is what their aim is, by he's carrying out their agenda, and so that they will continue contributing to his political action committees, and he can further his
it's a transmission
his political
belt
goal, right?
of money from everybody from Jeff Yass, the Philadelphia hedge fund guy, who's, I guess, got a libertarian bent and doesn't like anything with the word public in front of it. And then, our Christian nationalist oil guys out in West Texas who have completely just distorted the whole Republican Party here in Texas. And, and their, I think, views are more, they would just like to see public education go away completely. And of course, we can't let that happen. When I was going into middle school, my family had to move, and we, for a period of time, my father was not with the family. So my mother had 5 kids, moved to a new town, had to deal with like living in an old farmhouse that only had running water in the basement. And thank God there was a good public school system and even a summer youth program. In fact, I was just up in Pennsylvania where I grew up. My auntie passed away, my dad's older sister. And some of my siblings were remembering this summer playground we went to. And my mom was like, thank God that they had that, because I don't know what I would have done with you kids. There are families like mine all over Texas. We're not the outliers. We're the rule, whether it's I got a sick parent, or my dad lost his job, or he got deported, or fill in the blank. Schools are there as a way to make sure that children are well cared for. Yes, that they are educated. That's our main focus. But we've got to love our kids. And more, it feels like there are people who are spending a lot of money, like you said, to try to convince the voters that you don't need to love other people's kids. And, I forget, I guess it was it Horace Greeley who said, that which we want for our own children, we must want for everybody's children. Anything less is unlovely.
Yeah. Right. It's selfless, right? It's and it's recognizing that it's more than education alone, right? It's more than teaching math and science. It's about caring for the community and trying to bring everybody up and providing those resources in that place for them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we are a community, and we need to see ourselves as such.
For sure. Okay. And so you've been in the classroom, you've been in the union hall and the policy arena. What's one lesson you've learned about how to actually move the needle in education policy in Texas? We want change. We recognize that it needs to go through lawmakers for that to happen. How do we move the needle? How do we reframe this?
Right. So I think, going back to the issue of community organizing, we know that The other guys have more money than we do, but there are more of us than there are of them. So it really comes back to that. And look, it's a hard time right now to do community organizing. People really feel look, even I feel confused sometimes at how bizarre of a world we're living in right now. And yet we still live in a democracy. We still live in a state and a community and a country that has rules and laws. And there are ways to, change those rules and laws over time if people get organized and pushed together. And that's what we need to do. And there are a lot of there are 5.5 million school children in the state of Texas, which means there are tens of millions of people who have kids and grandkids in the public schools right now, and they care deeply about those kids, their success. We need to help them find ways to, see what the value of public education is. I worked for the union for a long time. I was an elected official in the union. I believe that teachers and school employees have a big role to play in helping get the public on board. Teachers remain among the most respected groups in our community and in our society. And I think teachers need to talk to parents. They need to talk to the people who they go to church with, who live on their street. There's been a real effort, and going back to the test scores, our state legislative director, who was, a genius, really smart guy, used to say, defund, demonize, and privatize. That's their playbook. Defund, demonize, and privatize. So we've got to fight on all of those levels. On the funding, we've got to push for more. Look, the Austin taxpayers will vote, even though our property taxes are pretty high. They will consistently vote for more taxes. The last bond we had, which was huge, I forget, $2.5 billion, it passed 2-1. People want to spend more money on education. So we need to be smart about how we ask for voters to support. And then the demonization, teachers and parents, we need to get the good stories. There's so much good stuff happening in public schools. And we, Austin Voices, in our own little way, are doing that. Whether it's working with the local PBS station, which is doing a whole year-long project on the Runberg neighborhood, we've really teamed up with them and gotten parents in front of their cameras to talk about what their kids are getting out of school, and their neighborhood's not a ghetto or the hood. Mm-hmm. It's a place where families are being raised, and they're proud of it, and they want it to be better, but they're willing to do what they need to do. So getting our stories out more, even like what you're doing with this podcast. And then we got to fight the privatization. I was the local president in Austin when we started a thing called the Coalition for Public Schools in the late 90s, because we saw the voucher push coming. And we pulled together, all the usual suspects, the teachers groups, the PTA, the school board associate, but we had 50 groups on there. We had the American University Women, we had all the AFL-CIO, and for almost 30 years, we beat vouchers. I'm not giving up. I believe that we will go to court with the governor over vouchers. I believe that the Texas Constitution has even stronger language than the U.S. Bill of Rights when it comes to religious freedom. And religious freedom in the Texas Constitution is a two-sided coin, just like it is in the U.S. Constitution. No compulsion and no interference with worship. And boy, the U.S. Supreme Court has spent a lot of time on the no interference with worship. But what about the compulsion part? Right. Why should we have to pay taxes that then go to fund a school that, doesn't just have the 10 Commandments up on the wall, but teaches a religious philosophy that neither of us agree with or subscribe to, and yet the state is demanding that we pay taxes and our tax dollars go to fund that. That to me is a violation of the state constitution.
Religious freedom goes both ways, right?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And I'm perfectly happy with the state not regulating private religious schools and letting those schools operate. And if parents want to send their children to those schools, both my sisters went to Catholic school, one all the way and one for a long period of time. My youngest brother went to the Hill School, a prestigious private school. It was in the same class with Donald J. Trump Jr. So, I got nothing against private schools or religious schools. I don't want to pay for them with my tax dollars because I got no control over those schools. They don't have to report anything. Their finances, their scores, nothing. They don't need to not discriminate against employees or against students. I want to fund schools that are open to everybody. I want to fund the schools that our state constitution demands that our state legislature create. There's not a lick about a higher ed in the Texas state constitution. They didn't say, create the University of Texas system, but they did say, you will create a system of free public schools. That is a constitutional obligation. It does not say, tax one man and pay for another man's private religious education.
Right. Yeah. And if they want to hold on to either the U.S. Constitution for whatever gains they're looking for or the Texas Constitution, right, then it becomes incumbent on us too to use that, right, as a way to fight back, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I agree. No, and I think you make a really good point about community organizing and continuing to fight. I think it's easy to forget what generations before us have been through, right? We've lived in a relatively easy period of history with little strife, right? And things may look bleak and tough and like we're getting beat down a bit, but it's in a lifetime before us that schools were segregated, right? And
they were.
Right.
They
and
were.
So if people can organize against big interest and money in politics and overcome these things, then there's no reason our generation and our communities and organizations can't do the same thing to overcome things like divestment and vouchers and the imposition of religion and things like that, right?
You're absolutely correct. You are correct. And I think for those of us that are struggling right now or feeling like we're living in difficult times, I do think it's important to go back and to realize that, when Lyndon Johnson taught school, he taught in a Mexican school. That was what they called it. That's what it was. That was who the school was built for and who was allowed to go there, people of Mexican descent. And we have come an extremely long way. And, it feels like a slight period of retrenchment right now, but that's happened before. We've had to sometimes take a half a step back, get repositioned, and then push forward again. It was interesting. I was listening to a program today about using race in college admissions and how, since the Supreme Court has prohibited that, schools have started to think differently and to start to think more about class and looking also at, a kid that struggles in a school that maybe doesn't make the great schools list, but excels nonetheless. One of the things that really caught my attention early on when testing started to be misused was that kids that were high flyers in low-income schools were being ignored because the school needed to get the kids in the middle over the bar. I even had a school once when I was the local president of the union call me up. These teachers were furious. They said, they're making us break up our classes for tutoring. And the kids who are like special needs, who are never going to pass the test, they're just sitting them in a corner with a book. And the kids who have passed the test every time and they're sitting them in a corner with the book.
They're just trying to maximize their limited resources and direction.
The bubble
right
kids.
In the middle. Yeah.
And they're like, this is academic malpractice. But that was what the system was demanding them to do. and it's wrong. And some of the people who make this argument, well, we got to do the testing and there has to be accountability. They want to make it a civil rights argument. For too long, the dark, corners of low, what was Bush's thing, the something of low expectations. And it is true, we have to be on guard for that, right? There was a history of pushing kids of color into the vo-tech programs rather than the college prep programs. We can't go back to that. Although I'll tell you now, some of the school to career stuff is like, these kids are learning coding and like they're going to go become software engineers. But many of the kids who have been the most hurt by this are high achieving, low income kids who go to schools where they just get fed a meager diet of, pass the test when what they should be given is so much richer.
Yeah. No, there's a whole world for them that's not being tapped, or a world of potential that's not being tapped, right? Just because there's not the resources to try to tap those that are looking to excel.
Absolutely. And, if you teach in a school in West Austin, first of all, every parent thinks their kid is gifted and talented, and they are. Every child is
No, they're
gifted
not.
and talented in some way. But those parents are in there advocating for those kids. Why isn't my kid in the AP section? Why isn't my kid, and that's good. Parents should advocate for their children. But lower income parents or parents that didn't go to college or don't understand the education system aren't always there to do that. So teachers need to do that. The community needs to do that. What are we doing? Because, man, the first year I taught second grade, I was blown away by how smart these kids were. I don't even know why I was blown away. Like, did I have low expectations myself? I could sit there and go, Ernesto, law school. Delia, medical school. I mean, these kids were so bright. They were so listos, ready, eager to learn. And a lot of them were like, I taught second grade. I mean, like I would do cleanup on reading for kids that had struggled in first grade, but I'd have kids like plowing through chapter books. They were way better readers than I was when I was 7. And I'm like, these are kids going places, but the whole system needs to be saying that.
Right.
And meeting those kids where they are, not saying, well, we're going to judge your school on one score, and so we really need to put all our eggs in the basket of mediocrity and none in the basket of extreme achievement.
Yeah, it's a paradigm shift, right? It's we need a new way of looking at it, truly, right? Get away from these scores. Okay, well, Louis, I do appreciate you taking the time. You're a wealth of knowledge, and appreciate that you're doing all that you're doing for public schools. So thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.